So as we said, the next day, June 8th, 2009, the WWE announces that Umaga has been released for the second time. This time it's revealed that his termination was due to a violation of the wellness policy. Even though it was only his second failure, the rumor and innuendo was his refusal to enter a rehab facility led to the dismissal. If you had that to do over again, would you do it any differently?
No. If you refuse help, then you're denying that you have a problem. And the denial is one of the bigger issues that you can deal with somebody with substance abuse issues, that they just won't admit they have a problem, or I can handle it. I got this. No, you don't have it. You've proven on multiple occasions now that you don't have it. So we got to get you some help. We want to help you. We want to help you rid yourself of this burden and get you back going. All the rehab was simply to get you healthy so we could bring you back and make more money with you. But, guys are in denial, and they look sometimes at going to rehab as a sign of weakness. I remember having long conversations with Jeff Hardy about that. And it came down to where I finally had to say, look, if you don't go to rehab, we're going to let you go. Maybe his pride was on the line, he thought, or maybe he looked at it made him look really weak that he had to go to rehab, but he refused. And so I did what we said we were going to do, and we let him go. Now, luckily for Jeff, he's rebounded. He's gone through he's clean and sober. Thank God. And look what that got him. It got him work in a nice spot, making a good living. And so we wanted the same thing, in a different time frame, but the same thing for Umaga. Let us help you get you well, and we're going to pay for it. So, and oftentimes too, Conrad, when we were doing those deals, and somebody had to get some help, they still got paid. You can't let them. You're not going to help their mental state by them worrying about paying for their overhead and their mortgage and the groceries and school clothes for their kids, et cetera, et cetera. That ain't going to help them. You're just piling, it's just, you're sending good money after bad. So most of the guys still got paid so they could take care of their families and focus on good health. But Eddie just refused to go to rehab, and I just think he felt it was just an overt sign of weakness, and he didn't want to be perceived as such.
It's a shame. I wouldn't be me if I didn't ask this. It's not like the company found out about this wellness situation between Sunday night and Monday morning. I assume this was Vince McMahon's old get the match in the ring. We've promoted it. We need to deliver it. And then we'll address these problems after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. We advertised it. The public bought tickets on it. They've already invested. Our audience, our fans, our customers, if you will, have already invested in it. Let's get the match in the ring and then move on. So that's kind of what we did. And it created another payday for him. And, nobody thought that for sure he wouldn't change his mind about going to rehab. It's not like you got to go to, Timbuktu. I think he was living in Houston at the time. So there's facilities in Houston that he could have attended, been a part of, and got healthier. My vision was get him healthy, get him more aware of nutrition, and understanding what he should eat and what he should not eat, how he should train, how he should not train. Because now we know he's got a bad wheel. And yes, you can get it surgically repaired. But if it just kind of tips the hand that, well, maybe some of these ligaments, because of the size this guy is and how he moved, how he ran, the stress he put on his knees, so his joints, is this just the tip of the iceberg? You never know, but it damn sure could be. So, but I never thought that, he'd bought a nice home in Houston. His family was comfortable, it seemed like. And he was living around a lot of the other guys. Shelton was there. I think Mike Chioda might have lived in that area. There were others, I believe. But nonetheless, that little wrestling community in the suburbs. So it seemed like things were good, but why he wouldn't go to rehab, we'll never know the answer. But I think a lot of it was just he didn't want to be perceived as a weak guy.
It's a shame. In July, he would appear for the World Wrestling Council down in Puerto Rico. He'd defeat Mr. Anderson in a singles match. 4 months later, he does this Hulk Hogan's Hulkamania tour of Australia. It's a series of matches. He's working with, Flair and Hogan in big spots here. I mean, he's certainly on the undercard, but the idea that he's involved in those main events with Flair and Hogan is a big deal. Meltzer would write he had reached an agreement to return to the company shortly before his death. And the chance to return came when the WWE, at least according to the reports, was attempting to sabotage this Hulk Hogan tour of Australia. Umaga's probably positioned here as the number 2 heel behind Flair, but he's given a shot to return, and it was made clear they didn't want him doing the tour. But Umaga, being who he was, he kept his commitments. And the rumor and innuendo was that Hogan tried to get him to come to TNA, but he told Hogan, I'd already made a commitment to WWE, where he was scheduled to debut at or around the Royal Rumble. And he told Hogan he felt a degree of loyalty to Stephanie and Triple H, who gave him an opportunity for his biggest run. And man, that says a lot about a guy when he has opportunities, but he's going to honor his word.
Yeah, and exactly. Look, Umaga had great character. He was a good, like I said at the very beginning of this podcast today, he was good-hearted. He had a good soul. He just was kind, but he got taken off the tracks at times. He was influenced by others. And sometimes in wrestling, the worst enemies a wrestler can have are other wrestlers. And sometimes there are a lot of agendas in that regard. I want your spot, we'll screw you up. Look, I remember stories back in the day where a guy was a booker. He would book he would book a talent to go on like a 4 or 5 day run so that he could nail the guy's wife. That was not unusual. And so consequently you had, the booker, creating the situation where the wife was kind of like saying, well, he's on the road, and if I don't do this with the booker, it's going to affect my husband's bookings, therefore affect his income. And if it affects his income, it affects our whole family. So if I'm going to sleep with a guy, I might as well sleep with the decision maker and solidify our position. That was the wrestling business. Wrestlers sometimes are their own worst, or the worst enemies, sometimes themselves, but they're also, some of them that are influenced by other guys, is a real sad situation. And I've seen it manifest itself in different forms over the last zillion years I've been in the business. But Eki was a fucking good-hearted dude, man. And he was loyal. He was always there. He didn't no-show. He wasn't hard to get along with. If anything, he was too amenable to others' input. You had a whole group of guys buying that shit off the online. He wasn't by himself. And I would guess to say this, Conrad, this left to Eki to go online and buy drugs was at the encouragement of others, because he just wasn't, quote unquote, an online guy. So but he's such a likable, lovable guy, he just went along. And of course he went too far.
We should mention, as he's coming back from this tour, from Australia, he's on a flight with both Ric Flair and Britney Spears, and Britney goes out of her way to introduce herself and talk to not Ric Flair, Umaga, because her ex-husband, Kevin Federline, did a few Raw shows and she watched, and she recognized Umaga before Flair, which is pretty remarkable. It's unfortunate that this is the next part of the story, December 4th, 2009, which is why we're covering this, because, tomorrow will be the anniversary of his passing. Fatu was found by his wife in their Houston, Texas home, unresponsive and with blood coming out of his nose. As you said, they'd moved to Houston with his family and actually lived next door to a lot of WWE superstars in the area. His wife went to bed and, he was watching TV on the couch, Earlier in the day, he'd casually mentioned to some folks he was feeling weird. Later, she went to check on him, saw he'd fallen asleep, and put a blanket on him. She came down a second time later, but this time she discovered he wasn't breathing and had blood coming out of his nose. She called 911. He was rushed to the hospital and they managed to restart his heart on the way, but he wasn't showing any brain activity. He was on life support at the hospital for much of Saturday, and friends and family were called to come be at his side. He suffered a second heart attack and was pronounced dead at approximately 3 p.m. Pacific. He was only 36 years old, and the toxicology reports would reveal that he had hydrocodone. I'm going to butcher this. Corizoprotol and diazepam in his system. Houston medical examiners also found that Fatu had both heart and liver disease. It was determined the combination of his drug use along with his bad heart ultimately led to his death. It's officially ruled a heart attack brought on by acute toxicity of multiple substances. You've gotten calls like this a lot, Jim, and that's a sad state of affairs and a sad sentence to say here, but can you walk us through how you got the news here? Cause this is, another sobering moment for everyone in the wrestling community.
Yeah. It's one of those calls you just hate to get. You know, sometimes in that role back in the day, you know, you almost hated for your phone to ring. Because more often than not, they weren't going to call you and say, "Hey, JR, I really appreciate that great payoff last week for the garden," or whatever. There was something wrong. There was an issue. That's just their nature. So you get used to that, but you still dread the phone calls because you know, we always managed, at least I always managed, worst case scenario involved. And the worst case scenario is somebody to be told that somebody's dead. So I think that I'm trying to think back who called me. I think it was one of the guys that he lived near. It might've been Shelton. It might've been Kyoto. I can't remember. Like I said earlier, there was a handful of guys that kind of formed their own little community down there and bought houses near each other. Same housing addition.
Charlie Haas, Shelton Benjamin, Torrey Wilson, Shad Gaspard. A lot of folks live down there.
Yeah. You know, now that you mentioned that, I'm trying to recollect. I think it might've been Charlie Haas that called me. Because Charlie also called me about his brother Russ. And I went to that funeral. But nonetheless, it's one of those calls you just dread to get, man. So you look back at it, you say, what could have been done differently? Well, he could have gone to rehab and got off the shit. That would have put less stress on his heart. The second thing is now with the wellness issues and the better protocol for in that company, for sure, you would have known if a guy had a heart issue. The same could be said for Eddie Guerrero. He died of a heart attack. Brian Pillman died of a heart attack. But the heart attacks were not, and some of them were DNA. Their DNA was such, but now there's checks and balances in place through the various blood work and the due diligence from medically that you can spot that stuff. But you're just talking about a different time and a different place, and you know, it also speaks to the point of, you know, the independent contractor aspect. You know, how much right do you have to impose on health issues and so forth? It's really a two-edged sword. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But now at least there's checks and balances in there that these people with heart issues can be earmarked ahead of the curve and not too late. But I think it's Charlie Haas that called me, and they're very emotional. He had 2 young sons and a young wife, and they'd found happiness, it seemed like. And he'd finally started making good money. How he saved it, how he invested it, how he paid his tax, I don't know that story. But I know that it was Charlie that called me, and it was just a heartbreaking day. You knew there was issues, Conrad, but you never expect the worst in that regard.